Hey people, welcome to the Run Test. It's Kieran here. I'm sat in the car somewhere outside of Oxford in the UK in a place called Abingdon. This morning I'm going to be running the Abingdon Marathon. It's raining, it's miserable, it's about as gloomy and grey as it gets. It's just gone 7:30. In this video and this race, I'm going to be testing a few watches. I've got the Fenix 7X versus the Apple Watch Ultra and the Garmin Enduro 2 and also the Suunto 9 Peak Pro. Now I'm going to be putting these watches to the marathon race test, looking at things like how accurate the GPS is, battery drain, heart rate, all of those things as I go and run this marathon. Now my marathon race plan for today is basically to run on feel. I'm actually going to wear the watches, but I'm going to cover them as well and run entirely on feel. In this race before, I've done a 3:11. It was about in 2018. So after 67 marathons in 67 days across Europe, I'm wondering how fit I am, what effects running on feel has. And so I'm just going to go out and see what I can get, see if I can go faster or not. But the main thing here is we are going to be testing these watches and seeing how they hold up to what is going to be a very damp marathon test. So that's the Abingdon Marathon done, finished, got one of these. I'm at the finish line now, a bit busted up. Think I ran like a 3:01 or something, not entirely sure. I haven't got the official time. On my watch, when I stopped one of my Garmin's, it said 3:01. But in terms of the performance, all of these watches, actually the Fenix 7X, the Enduro 2, the Suunto Peak 9 Peak Pro, and the Apple Watch have all come in within that kind of margin for error. The Apple Watch has come up at 26.26. The Enduro 26.34, the Fenix 7X was 26.34, I think, and the Suunto is 42.38 kilometers. I've got that one in case, so it's all pretty much bang on. I'll have a look at the battery lives and stuff when I get back and see how they've performed, how much drain we've got from that kind of time. But yeah, in terms of GPS performance, they seem to, on distance at least, they seem to have done pretty well. So we'll dive into the heart rate, battery life back in the office. So I'm off to recover. It's the day after the Abingdon Marathon where I picked up this really rather lovely wooden medal. And here I'm going to talk you through some of the things that I sort of found on the day now that I'm a bit more recovered and I've got my head on. So first up, early in the warm-up, I got a chance to do a bit of a test of the screens of these watches in kind of really wet conditions. And there's quite a simple hierarchy of how these watches perform. So in terms of kind of brightness, sharpness, kind of punch, colors, all of those things, I think overall kind of legibility, the Apple Watch is probably my favorite. I think it's, you know, it's got the Apple Watch screen. It's got an amazing performance. It's sort of vivid and strong. It's sort of hands down the winner for me. Then you've sort of move into the Garmin's. I think the Garmin's screen performance has come on leaps and bounds. And, you know, I love the fact you've got loads and loads of big kind of screen real estate. It's really nice and easy to see. It's much brighter than they used to be. Punchy, colors are good. Those two kind of come in second. I don't think there's a great deal to choose between the Fenix 7X and the Enduro 2. So not much to choose there. And then kind of bringing up the rear, if you will, you've got the Suunto 9 Peak Pro, which just feels a little bit old school, not so bright, not so easy to read, massive kind of bezel. It feels like it's kind of been left behind a little. Now, another thing to note, that out there it was super wet, so it was interesting to get a chance to have a fiddle with the touch screens and see which of those would work when they got soaking wet. That's where I think the kind of Suunto 9s sort of let itself down as well, because obviously some of the controls you've got to do via the touchscreen rather than the buttons, and that became an issue. The Apple Watch has solved some of that, obviously with this kind of new button, which you can have a shortcut, takes you straight to a workout. So you literally can press that button, tap once and launch a workout. So that was easy for the race start, where it's a little bit more kind of complicated to get going on the Suunto 9. Garmin, in terms of overall kind of control, that mixture of touchscreen and buttons is a win. I always kind of deviate to the buttons though in kind of those kind of conditions, marathon conditions, where it's really easy. So for me, the Garmin wins it in terms of the controls. Onto GPS performance, obviously a chance to test this up against a marked course. I had the two Garmins in normal mode, I had the Suunto in performance mode, and the Apple Watch was also in normal mode. Now they all performed really quite closely and within an acceptable kind of margin for error on these things. If you look at the stats that I've got up on screen now, I mean, you can see that the Apple Watch was the closest with 26.26, but the others with 26.3 something came really close in too. Nothing kind of weird to report from that. Now, I've also had a good sort of dive into all of the route maps from these to see if there's any kind of aberrations, any anomalies. People got me running in rivers or through buildings, and none of those for any of the watches. So overall GPS performance, there's not a great deal to choose between them, and really solid overall, very close to the marathon distance. Heart rate performance then, well, first up I've got to make a confession. I made a gaffe. I've been testing this watch for the full review that's coming on the channel soon, and I'd switched the wrist heart rate off to do another kind of battery test. I forgot to put it on before I went around. So the Suunto 9 Peak I don't have heart rate data for, so I've got to put that onto one side. The other three watches I do. I had the Enduro 2 using the optical. I had the Fenix 7X. I was paired to a HRM Pro strap, so it's basically the Enduro 2 and the Apple Watch up against the chest strap. Now both of those actually really performed quite well as well. The HRM strap and the Enduro 2 were absolutely identical in terms of the averages and the max heart rates. The Apple Watch was really the same on the overall average. It just didn't quite clock the kind of max heart rate the same as the chest strap by a couple of beats, which again, it's a really, really solid performance. And I went in to sort of look at the mile splits, the average heart rate across some of the mile splits across the two watches and the heart rate chest strap as well. And they're a pretty close match all the way through as well. So we're not seeing, there's no sort of crazy spikes, no kind of crazy bits where one watch kind of the heart rate dropped out. I was running a fairly sort of steady pace. So I ran a steady marathon, I was running on feel. So I mean, it wasn't too hitty. There weren't sort of situations where necessarily I kind of pushed the pace or the intensity or had to deal with it. So over that kind of even run, where you sort of see a bit of HR drift, these watches performed really quite closely against the heart rate chest strap, which again is quite impressive. So finally I looked at the overall kind of battery burn from the moment I took them off the charge right through to finishing the race, just to see how they would handle. I ran a 3:01, so it's 3 hours of run time in that. And it's unsurprising perhaps that the Garmin Enduro 2 and the Fenix 7X kind of win this one pretty hands down really. They both leached 6% battery during the run time. The Suunto 9 Peak Pro cost, I think it was 8% battery, but notably with the Suunto, the optical heart rate was switched off along with a lot of other settings. So the backlight was off, there were no notifications, and I had a few other kind of performance settings off to try and max out the battery. And obviously that's going to burn less over the marathon distance. Now when it came to the Apple Watch Ultra, this one burnt through 27% during the marathon runtime. It also dropped 5% just getting to the race start. So it's burnt nearly as much from my leaving the house, taking it off charge, I think at about 6 o'clock in the morning to the run start at 9, as the Garmin's cost during the entire marathon. So yeah, worse performance from the Apple Watch Ultra, but that is still a better performance than you're going to get from sort of previous Apple Watches. Now, if I'm going to give a verdict about kind of which watch I think performed best or would be best for a marathon, I wouldn't necessarily buy them just for this reason, but if you're looking for, if this is part of your overall kind of where you're coming to a conclusion on which watch to buy and you're going to be running a lot of marathons, the Apple Watch is now, I think, a really kind of solid performer when it comes to being a marathon watch, mainly thanks to that big boosted battery life. It means you can arrive, run your marathon, but also after that you're still going to be able to, you know, utilize all of the other things that make the Apple Watch really great, all the smartwatch smarts, you know, the phone, the music, you know, payments, all of those things that if you want to leave your phone at home, You know, you're not going to get to the end of the marathon and find this is dead and you can't do any of that. So it's definitely getting there as a watch that, you know, now you can feel a bit more comfortable running a marathon and still having a watch to use when you finish. Now, I guess one of the real biggies is whether or not the Fenix 7X is any better than the Enduro 2 or vice versa. And I think there's very little to choose between these in terms of marathon performance. You look at a similar battery life, similar heart rate performance, similar GPS performance, and overall, I think really what it's maybe going to come down, if you're not bothered about having sort of Apple Watch smarts and all of those other things that, you know, the extras that you get about the Apple Watchness of it all, and you're choosing between these two, essentially the Fenix 7X is going to come in a chunk cheaper. So for me, if you're going to call it that way, I think perhaps I'd go Fenix 7X. And then finally, you've got the Suunto 9 Peak Pro. Now, this is a much cheaper watch, so it's kind of out of its depth maybe in this comparison. Still, I think it's an interesting one whilst I'm testing it to see how it did up against these. You're going to pay sort of £459 for it, I think. So it's sort of almost half the price of some of these watches we've got here. And overall, I'm not sure I would recommend it. I think there's sort of, it'll do a solid job of tracking a marathon. It feels like one of those watches that sort of, now it feels like a more basic watch. It has got sort of extra skills to it. But I think there's a couple of things that, you know, for me sort of let it down still. I think the sort of old school kind of screen and display, massive kind of bezel. And I just still don't think that Suunto has nailed the UI or the controls, even though they've got that combined kind of touchscreen button thing going on. They haven't quite made it that easy to use, particularly if conditions get a bit wild like they were for me. So there you have it. That's been my marathon test of the Apple Watch Ultra, the Garmin Fenix 7X, the Enduro 2 and the Suunto 9 Peak Pro. Hope you found that useful. If you have any questions about those watches specific to kind of marathon usage, hit me up in the comments below. We're going to have, well, there are reviews of some of these watches already on the channel. There are kind of full reviews coming up for the Apple Watch Ultra and the Suunto 9 Peak Pro coming on the channel too soon. So like and subscribe, ring the bell so you'll get notified when those come out. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about the watches. I had a lot of fun running in the rain, running a 301. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and we will see you again soon on the Run Testers.